Alright, hello there guys, it's Jack here from Peach Guitars. Today is a big day for me. We're going to carry on with a thing that set us off in really good stead on YouTube a little while back. You may have seen we shot a video a few months ago where we compared the brand new at the time PRS Silver Sky guitar up against one of the original series of Fender John Mayer signature Strats. What that inspired me to do was really just go all in. So whereas that video was just showing off the two guitars, what we wanted to do today was really explore and kind of muse out a little bit on the real finer details of what's gone into John Mayer's rigs and tones over the years. Today I'm really just going to focus on what most people think of when they think of Mayer in terms of his electric sound. So obviously I'm playing a black Strat. This was pure coincidence. This is a fantastic custom shop, I think a 1960 Strat. We were searching for a guitar to do this yesterday and this one happened to be on the wall. Black Strat, obviously it looks the part, in comparison to his famous black Strat, and it actually sounds fantastic as well. So just a couple of specs on this guitar. This has got the custom shop Tomatillo pickups in it, which marries up perfectly with the rig that we're going for to get this kind of sound here. So obviously when I came in on the video there, I was trying my best to play the gravity riff and a little bit of the lead, and it just nails that sound as far as I'm concerned. You really want for that kind of thing a Strat with low output pickups, and John has remarked about that guitar being particularly dynamic because of how quiet it is. So that's a really good element to have when you're going for this kind of, not only the tone but also the approach to the playing. So you'll have heard also in the beginning there I was playing through the Two-Rock traditional clean. Now I'm going to stick with this rig for probably most of this video because this is essentially the quintessential John Mayer guitar sound. When most people think of him, as I said before, you're thinking of around 2006, that Continuum era kind of guitar tone, which at the time he was using his signature Two-Rock head and the black Strat predominantly, and a couple of pedals which we'll come on to in a little bit. Obviously as time's gone on he's expanded his repertoire of music and the different tones that he needs to get that kind of thing happening. So that's why we're going to delve into some other options later in the video. We're going to look at some other, another Two-Rock, and also of course the PRS J-Mod amplifier as well. But for now, I'm just going to talk you through a little bit more about this particular setup. The traditional clean of all the current range of Two-Rock amplifiers is definitely closest in its DNA to what John was using at the time. So essentially, my understanding of it is that the John Mayer signature was obviously a very limited amplifier. That inspired the Crystal amp, which came out a couple of years ago, which then morphed into the traditional clean a couple of years after that. So this is basically continuing on the lineage of the John Mayer signature, and it just sounds exactly right. It's a little darker and a little bit more punchy than a classic Fender style circuit that Two-Rock also do very well, and I think it really nails that sound perfectly. So when I came in at the video there, I was playing obviously the clean sound of the amp with reverb on board. You'll also have heard a little bit of tremolo, and that was coming from the Keeley Verbo Trem. I'm just using it for a bit of harmonic tremolo to kind of approximate some of that real subtle shift in the gravity tone. And then for the lead tone, I put on the J-Rocket Archer. So I'm going to talk you through each of the pedals that I'm using as I'm using them, and kind of talk a little bit about just my personal approach and my personal interpretation into each of these tones. So this video is not going to be like a trying to nail every single tone. I just wanted to delve into kind of different components of each rig that he had, and also explain that the tone that you're going to hear on records is not just one particular amp tone. It's usually a combination of a couple of different things. So even though the traditional clean pretty much nails it, when I play the Silver Sterling a little bit later on, you're going to hear just how it tackles it in a slightly different way, but just imagine them being played together, and that's really when you're going to get the full effect of the tone. Alright, so while I've got this setup still plugged in, let me talk you through a few more of the classic tones. I'm going to do my best to play some of them as well, some of the riffs that you'll know from, particularly from the Continuum record we're going to focus on, because as I said before, that is really what most people think of as the John Mayer sound. So let me just break it down completely. First of all, I'm going to show you the clean guitar tone, and then I'm going to start adding some effects, and we'll talk about what kind of riffs that would have been used for. One thing I also forgot to mention at the start is I'm using the Way Huge Aquapus, and that's on for a slapback delay all the time. So that's basically something that John does just to add a little bit more space to the sound, and you really hear it when he goes for some of those percussive rhythm kind of things in certain tracks. So let me break it down first of all without that delay, and then I'm going to put it back on when I start playing some song examples. Okay, so that's just the straight amp tone with reverb on board. I'm going to put the delay on now and you'll hear what it's doing. Really not a lot, but it just helps to meld the whole thing together and does add a bit of depth too. So before we move on from that gravity tone that I was using in the beginning, let me just show you what the tremolo was doing as well so you can hear the full effect. So not a great deal, but for that particular song I do think it adds a nice bit of ambience. And really, these are the finer details that you've got to pay close attention to when you're going for some of these tones from John Mayer. Really, a lot of people just mistakenly associate it as a clean Strat into a clean amp, which of course that's the basis of it, but there's a lot of different elements, especially on the recorded tones, that really make it that special tone that most people revere. It's not just as simple as plugging a guitar into an amp a lot of the time. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to turn the reverb up on the traditional clean a little bit, and let's address that song first of all, shall we? Alright, so that's always a song that I'm very reluctant to play because it's one of those that, again, is so revered, so copied, and everyone knows how it sounds, and to nail it is really, really difficult. But I think once you get the right sound, and in that case I was using the Archer again just for that solo boost, it's really a case of just, the dynamics are so important. So the way you're picking, and especially with fingers as opposed to using the pick all the time, these are really what makes up the real strong elements of that tone. I've got two overdrive pedals on the board here today, as John Mayer often does himself, and he uses them in very different ways. So most people will associate the Tube Screamer, or more specifically the TS10 from Ibanez, with him. And I would say, and by the way, I've dialed everything in just to my own ears. This is just my interpretation of kind of using these different bits of equipment that we know he uses and trying to discern how he uses them. So to take the place of the Tube Screamer, I've got the JHS Bonsai today. And in my opinion, that's the pedal that he uses for more of the higher gain stuff. The Archer being more, or in place of the Klon Centaur, of course, just as more of a subtle boost. And I think that works on those kind of more dynamic songs like that. The TS10, or the Bonsai in this case, is better for the real kind of full out, heavier blues stuff that he does. So let me give you an example of that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is select the two different drive pedals together, and that really was reminiscent of, again, just to my ear, the kind of tone that you got on the intro of the live version of Belief from like the Where the Light Is album. So let me stack them both together and you'll hear just how much gain you get and how kind of punchy and direct it becomes. So you can hear the huge dynamic gulf between the really overdriven tone I had at the start for the solo there, and then turning both pedals off for the clean tone. This is something that's often overlooked with John Mayer's tone, I think. Again, a lot of people just assume it's either completely clean or completely overdriven. There's so many different shades in between, and having an amplifier as powerful and with as much headroom as this, in conjunction with a guitar where it's nice and low output pickups that you've got going on as well, that dynamic range is just enormous. Okay, so one thing I want to explore quickly is the differences between different amplifiers. So as I said before, his tone was often an amalgamation of different amps being used at the same time. So he'd have used his signature often in conjunction with one or two different Dumbles. Now the Dumble connection is where the Silver Sterling signature from Two Rock comes in. Obviously this is the most recent addition to Two Rock's line. A lot of people went nuts about it because it's very much a replica of number 004, I believe, which was one of the original steel string Singer amplifiers, which is what John was using. So let's plug that in. I'm just going to talk you through some of the differences with that amplifier and how the dynamics shift a little bit. Okay, so obviously I've moved over to a different amplifier now. I'm now using the Silver Sterling signature, which, as I said before, was really a more direct takeoff of some of the Dumble models that John was using back in the day. So this is a much brighter and a little bit stiffer of an amplifier, I think, and you immediately hear that in its response. And I wanted to play that riff right at the start just to kind of express that most clearly. So when you're playing real rhythmic stuff, this amplifier responds in a slightly different way to the traditional clean, and in turn the Mayer signature would have done. I also put on the bonsai partway through that for the lead part, and you can hear that it takes the pedals in a very different way as well. There's a lot more top end from this amplifier. This is the 100 watt version as opposed to the 150 watt version, but it's still got ample headroom. Also got a little bit more top end and reverb on this amp, so you really hear the response when I play the low notes and kind of go for that raked muted thing. You really hear how percussive it is. Okay, so I wanted to jump straight to what is obviously the grey elephant in the room, the PRS Silver Sky. There's been a lot of talk about this guitar, so I wanted to just take a moment to talk about my own thoughts on this guitar. When we did the video before comparing this directly to the Fender John Mayer Signature Strat, As I said, it was really torn. A lot of people did prefer the Fender, but a lot of other people preferred the PRS for completely different reasons. And I think that alone signifies why John Mayer made the change to a guitar like this. First of all, I don't think it is trying to compete directly with the classic Strat tones that he was getting. A lot of people obviously would look at this guitar and think, well, it's trying to be a Fender Strat. In a lot of ways it is, but in a lot of its own ways, it's got the PRS stamp on it, and that has really informed John's playing in a different way, I think. But really, I think this has springboarded John's playing into a different direction, and you do hear now that, especially live, whenever he's using this guitar, I think this stands out a little bit more. It's a little bit more present. It maybe doesn't have quite as much of that sweetness and mellowness that a good Fender Strat has, but this guitar is much more present, and I think it really suits, as I said, some of the more musical directions John's been going in these days. So I wanted to play this guitar quickly through the same 2-rock before we move on to the PRS amplifier, which is obviously a little bit better mated to. So let me just play a couple more tunes with a couple of the different drive pedals as well, so you can hear this guitar in the same context as what you've heard before. So just playing clean there for the moment, you'll hear it's actually quite a bit louder, this guitar, than that particular Strat was. So it's pushing the front end of the amp a little bit more. And again, that just highlights what John was going for in this guitar, I think, is just to make a bit more of a modern sound. It's a lot more punchy, but it's also a little bit more smoothed out. So those dynamic peaks aren't quite as extreme as with the Strat. But if I put on the gain pedal now, you'll hear just how much smoother it is. So I'm going to put on the Bonsai and you'll hear that kind of tone. Okay, so it is a bit smoother, but you can hear it still cleans up in the same way that a good Strat would do. Once again, if I stay with that heavy gain sound and put the Archer on top of it, you're going to hear that it really is just a nice, smooth, modern sounding guitar, which I think works really, really well in this context as well. And just to jump back to clean quickly, I'm going to show you the middle pickup on this guitar, which I think is kind of quintessential funk rhythm, John Mayer kind of tone. So let's just hear it one more time through this 2-rock before we move on to the PRS amp. So I just wanted to play that little lick as well, again with the Archer gain pedal on, just to show that this guitar can still do that sensitive dynamic thing for anyone who's unconvinced. I really do think that the rivalry between Fender's guitars and this Silver Sky is kind of unnecessary. They do different things in different ways, both very, very well. And I do think that if you haven't tried one of these guitars, don't be so quick to shoot it down, because it's a very comfortable instrument to play. And I do think it nails some of those classic tones if you want to go that direction as well, but it just has this little bit more of a hi-fi kind of sheen to it, which I personally really like, but of course that's up to you. Okay, so obviously, lastly of all, I've moved on to another one of the big elephants in the room, perhaps, which is the Mayer PRS Signature J-Mod amplifier. Again, this came out a couple of years ago, and it kind of coincided with another massive shift in John Mayer's musical direction, which was around the time, or just after the time he joined Dead & Company and started doing those kind of gigs. This is perhaps what I would say is one of the most misunderstood amplifiers of all time, and we are actually going to produce another video detailing all about this. So hold fire for that one. But I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of this amplifier, and again, just show you how it compares to the Two Rocks. Again, it's not really a night and day difference like people were saying with the difference between the Fender Strat and this guitar. It's just its own thing. It's a lot darker and warmer sounding, and that's obviously courtesy of the cabinet change as well. This is a 212 cabinet that's closed back as opposed to the open back cabinets we've been using for the other amps. But it's still 100 watt 6L6 driven. You'll notice it's up pretty loud, and that's another thing that people have said about this amp. It's quite dark and woolly. It's just one of the most dynamic amplifiers out there, so when you play it hard, you really have to watch out because those peaks come out really, really suddenly. So it's quite interesting in a way that the shift has gone from a very, very dynamic guitar in the form of the Strat that he was using around the Continuum era, with an amp that's a little bit more compressed, perhaps like his previous Two Rock Mayer Signature. And that's kind of the other way around. The guitar is a little bit more compressed and a little bit more full range and punchy, and the amp just has this enormous dynamic range to it. It's a very subtle change, but I think it's kind of turned on its head a little bit, and that's changed the way he plays. So I wanted to demonstrate that with the new light solo there a little bit, just because that's a real great example of how his playing has changed over time. Still got that same dynamic sensibility, and I was using the Bonsai there, so typically higher gain sound with the other amplifiers, but I was still able to get a really nice clean punchy tone out of it as well, just by backing off the dynamics of my picking hand. So really, really interesting contrast there. Let's just play a couple more tones with this setup, because I do think it sounds really, really good, especially if you want to try some of the more classic stuff. So let's give one of those classic tunes a go, and you see how it compares. So that was with the tremolo on again now, and I don't think it's a huge difference from the original Two Rock tone, but something that's obviously missing here is the reverb, the spring reverb that these two Two Rock amplifiers have on board. It was a very conscious decision, is my understanding, to not include reverb on this amplifier, and that's because John was starting to use more outboard pieces of gear. So lots of different reverb pedals, of course, stuff that we're more familiar with, but he was also using really high-grade studio rack reverb units in the effects loop of the amplifier. So to kind of take the place of that, I'm going to use from MXR the Reverb Pedal that they came out with a few years ago. I think it sounds fantastic. I'm actually using it on the Epic setting at the moment, so it's a real kind of ambient wash that again has informed some of the way he plays in some of his more recent tracks. So let me give an example with the reverb on now. it goes on. So that's much more of a modern tone than you would have had in the kind of Continuum era with the Two-Rock and the Strat, but I think it just shows, again, how the music's changed and the gear has kind of followed it. So it can still do both things if you want to do that. It can still get the classic tones, but it will take you in a different direction and allow you to do more things, basically just widen the palette on which you can kind of paint your different ideas of tone and the ways you want to play. So I think it's really great to have that option. So last of all, I wanted to switch to one final guitar. This is one of the PRS semi-hollow special limited edition guitars that we've featured quite heavily on the channel, and the reason for that is I absolutely adore this guitar. I think it's a fantastic kind of workhorse, really versatile instrument, but of course you would be forgiven for thinking that it's very, very similar in appearance to one of the guitars that John Mayer's been using recently, which is of course the Super Eagle, that was developed, as I said, around the time that he started doing the work with Dead & Company, which also coincided with the introduction of this amplifier. There's been a very significant shift in the way that John has been playing lately, and I think the gear has followed that. So the Silver Sky was obviously one kind of side of the coin. The other side of the coin is guitars like this and the Super Eagle that he's been using, and it just opens up a whole nother realm of tone, much warmer obviously. And I was actually using position 2 with both pickups in the split coil position, but it's still a much warmer sound than that very glassy mid-scooped kind of Strat thing that he's known for. It's just a very different kind of approach. This is obviously much more in keeping with the Dead & Company tones that he's been getting. So let me give you another example of that, and then also show you just how you can use a guitar like this to get some of those classic Mayer tones too. So let's just hear a couple more lines in this particular pickup configuration. So it's got that very kind of joyful bounce to it, which I remember seeing the unveiling video of this amplifier at the NAMM show a couple of years ago, where John was playing a 594 guitar as well, and it just, when you have those humbucking tones going through an amp like this, it just adds another level of power to the tone, because obviously you've got a lot more output coming from the guitar. So let me go to one of the humbucking settings. I'm going to show you the neck, and I'll go to the bridge as well, and just show you the true strength of this particular setup with this amplifier as I understand it, which is to say it's just got way more of that dynamic sensibility I was talking about earlier, but obviously to suit a different kind of guitar. So let's hear a couple of tones. So it suits a lot of the trio stuff as well that he was doing back in the day with the 335 and guitars like that. Using the neck humbucking tone, that amp just has so much kind of stiffness and rigidness in the power section that even though it's incredibly loud and wound up almost all the way, you just still got all this expressive dynamic range to it. Let me show you the same kind of thing on the bridge pickup now, going in the opposite direction, something a lot softer. So a lot of these tones are quite similar, I would say, especially the ones with the single coil pickup guitars, but I think just showing what these amplifiers respond like with another guitar in the mix is showing just how a real simple setup and just changing various components within can really shift the dynamics of your music. And I do think that John Mayer, as opposed to many other guitarists out there at the moment, is probably the leading light in doing that, in really shifting entire genres of music that he's playing and the dynamics that he's playing with. And just using real simple equipment, but just really high quality stuff, and it just proves how important these different attributes are, I think. Right guys, thanks so much for watching this video. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate it, and hopefully you're as interested in John Mayer's tones and playing as I am. I wouldn't say that I've done it the best justice in the way I've played some of these songs today, but I just wanted to try and prove how great these tones are and how the different pieces of equipment he's used throughout the years have really impacted the way he's played, and subsequently what most of us are fumbling around trying to learn what he's doing. So I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, if you want to find out any more info of any of the products that you've seen in the video here today, and the good news is, of course, that you are able to find out the info and purchase them if you want to, all from one place, which is quite unusual, I'd say. So if you want to find out any more info, go to peachguitars.com. All of these items are in stock and available for purchase, and you'll be able to see full high-resolution images of all the guitars, amplifiers, and get current pricing information there too. One last thing I will say, guys, if you have enjoyed it, please give us a like, comment, and all that stuff as usual, but do us a favour and share this video with your friends, because the last video we did featuring John Mayer's name in the title really blew up for us, so hopefully this will be part 2 and we'll get even bigger. So let's keep those views going. Thanks so much for the support. Stay tuned, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, guys.